G'day folks, Chris McLean back with yet another episode of the show, and in the studio today I've got Michelle from The Wired Agency. And 5 years ago, Michelle invested in The Wired Agency, which has become a full-service digital agency working closely with brands such as Pizza Hut, Assembly, Label and Chatime. Their brand purpose is to move digitally, humanly, and they work across creative services, strategy, social media, marketing, influencer marketing, and digital performance and partnerships. Michelle also founded Magnum Co back in 2005 at 25 years of age before exiting the company in October of this year. And the agency went from being a traditional PR house to an award-winning integrated brand comms agency. Got a lot of stuff under the belt, Michelle. Got a lot of things going on. Been around for quite a while. 2005 was pretty early in the game. So thanks so much for dropping by. I'm sure you got a lot of insights that you can share with us here today.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Thanks for the intro. Hopefully I can be of help today.
I'm sure you can with you going back a couple of decades now, just about in experience, which is always interesting. I mean, I started at a similar time, sort of founded around 2002 when I founded my agency. So similar time, pre-social, pre-digital. Is a very, very different time to what we kind of find ourselves in today.
Yeah.
So maybe take us back through, I guess, if you want to go all the way back to that first agency and sort of how that PR comms piece blew out and how you sort of rolled into what you're doing now with Wired.
Yeah, well, that's really showing my age, isn't it? 2005. So I started Magnum as a traditional PR house, like you said, and I think what we found was once we started taking on brands, we realized the potential for expanding out our service line. So over a couple of years, we decided to look at introducing new service lines. So like you said, back in the day, social media wasn't what it is today. And it was probably more of like a publishing platform. And because our background was PR, we were quite good at telling stories. So we decided that social media probably fit quite naturally to our wheelhouse. And so we started to do social media. And I think it all just went from there. And I think one of the key things with owning an agency is to make sure you're adaptable. So you go with the industry and you go where the demand is. So after a couple of years, we became full service. And yeah, what a ride it was. 16 years before I sold the agency. And, it was such a big journey for me because I went from being a PR practitioner to a business owner, and that is no small transition. You go from being a practitioner to an IT specialist to a bookkeeper to a business owner to a business leader to an HR specialist, and it's a really wild ride. And I think the expectation, if you ever do start your own agency, is that you're going to make mistakes. And making mistakes is actually critical because that's where you learn your biggest lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think particularly over that time span, right, 2005 pre-social media up to 2021, everything's digital and social now. That shift in the industry, as I said, I started out a similar time, sort of Facebook launched in 2007. MySpace was around 2005, 2006. That's a dating myself at the same time. But I mean, it was very, very new. Where did you actually get when you started with social media? What did that look like? Just to go back and sort of talk into social media for the people today that don't know what that looked like.
Yeah. At one point to make, I suppose, when I was talking about how you have to adapt and change according to demand and the market, I think one thing that really helped us move from a traditional PR house was having certain clients on board that were really focused on storytelling. Like one of our first clients was Red Bull, and they were talking about storytelling 20 years ago. So I think that helped us evolve as an agency. So we recognize the importance of content and storytelling back then. So for us to make the transition into offering another service line was actually quite easy. But yeah, I mean, social media back in the day was, I would call them content publishing houses. So there was no performance side, there was no paid side. So engagement really relied on telling great stories and producing great content. But yeah, I mean, we fumbled our way through. You know, we weren't social media specialists, so we had PR practitioners that wanted to make the transition into social media, and so it was a fumbling way of introducing a new service line. But I think then you just learn on the job, don't you? And you work out what works, and you're focused on the metrics. And if the metrics work, then you just build up the skill set that way.
Yeah, as like you said, fumble forward, fail forward. Is that sort of the entrepreneurial idea, and particularly with agencies, the idea of building the plane while you're flying it. I think that's a very apt sort of allegory or sort of an example of what we do as agency, and you just kind of finish it out as you go along.
You finish it out as you go along. And even, I mean, when I decided to start the agency 16 years ago, I had no idea what I was doing. I hadn't done an MBA. And in fact, I would say you don't need to do a business degree to get into business. And in fact, it probably gives you an advantage because you don't know the statistics around how many businesses fail within the first year or two. And so I went in fairly blind, I suppose, blind optimism. But I learned along the way, you know, I didn't even know how to register a business. But I was really passionate about doing my own thing and having the choice of what clients I wanted to work with. And that was it. I didn't build up the agency to be what it is today at all. For me, it was about following passion and having the choice on what brands I wanted to work for. And I didn't necessarily get that choice when I was working for other people. And then that little ambition or passion it turned into something successful, but it wasn't about the money at all. It was about focusing on what I was passionate about. And the rest seemed to take care of itself.
Yeah, that's the fire in the belly, right? That's the thing that gives you that motivation on that day. Like those days when you get into the office, like, I just don't know what I'm doing today. I got this client, I need money in the business, I need more cash flow, this has gone wrong. That's when it gives you that motivation to dig deep and go, right, this is why I'm doing this. Let's just figure it out. Everything will kind of work out.
Focus on what you love the most, and the rest tends to take care of itself. It really does. I think also if you're passionate about what you do, you find energy that you didn't realize you had.
Yeah. Passion and purpose is massive for motivation and performance, because it's that thing that gives you that why, right? That reason of today is shitty, but tomorrow can be better, and I'm just going to get into it and I'm going to figure it out. But I think that figuring shit out mindset, that is massive for any business owner, but particularly in agencies, there can be very different moving parts in an agency. And like you said, a lot of us can come into it as the creative, sort of as the practitioner, and now we've suddenly got to put on all these business hats and these marketing hats and these leadership hats and all these other things that we all these skill sets that we haven't had, and you have to build that along the journey. Is that how did you go about that process? If you look back, was it literally just?
Would we call it a process? I think it was just an absolute.
It was a journey. Shit show.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know anything about business, so I just learned because it was necessary. I learned how to set up a business because it was necessary. I learned about IT because it was necessary. Like when I started, we didn't have a huge amount of money. We didn't even have baseline revenue. So you either have to figure it out yourself or you don't, and your business doesn't work. I think you'd be amazed at how resourceful and solutions focused any person can be if they need to. That's probably the biggest lesson I learned. Was I was so passionate about, like I said, just having the choice to choose the clients I wanted to work with and having the flexibility to work my own hours. And because I was focused so much on that, any obstacle that got in my way, I just figured it out, moved on, figured it out, moved on. I mean, hiring our first staff member was, that was interesting. It was such a chicken and egg situation because we'd won a couple of clients, and we thought, oh shit, we actually need to hire people. And then we thought, well, how do we do that? I mean, do we get a recruiter on board? Well, we can't really afford that. So how do we hire people? Then we looked at, hiring through, I think it was Seek at the time. Maybe we'd put some ads up or whatever. But then actually having our first employee start was just a wild ride because, like I said, we had to transition from being practitioners to business owners and, people managers and all that kind of stuff. But I think if you want to start your own agency, you do really need to have an expectation that you're going to make mistakes, and you need to see making mistakes as a real gift, because the biggest mistakes I made also carried the biggest lessons.
Was that something? Is that something that you recognize now, or did you kind of have that growth mindset at the time, or is it more retrospective, looking back, or at the time you just stumbling forward and figuring stuff out? Was there intention in that mindset at the time, or was it just kind of how you were wired?
Probably not. I mean, that's the thing. I can look back now and go, these are the lessons that you need to think about. But yeah, it was probably more just, like I said before, just fumbling my way through and just dealing with the shit in front of me and then moving on. But yeah, I guess retrospectively speaking, I can probably speak a little bit more about the lessons having gone through it now.
Yeah, I find that interesting. There's this balance between, I guess, as you said, sort of stumbling, figuring stuff out for yourself, and having process. And I think that's something that might be interesting to talk about as well. Obviously, the shift in education and access to information and access to marketing agency coaches and social media coaches and business coaches specifically for what we do, that didn't exist 10, 20 years ago, right? That's exploded, obviously, kind of over COVID over the last couple of years, but even the last decade or so, right? I remember we were in a similar position to, like, how do we grow this business? Do I go get an MBA? Do I learn business? Do we get a business coach? Do I go to a Tony Robbins seminar? Like, how do I grow this thing? How do I get better? Those resources exist. Like, I can go on Facebook today and find 20 digital marketing agency coaches and sign up for a digital agency program and get a process.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting to me that I like following a process. Obviously shortcuts a lot of that figuring shit out, but then you also lose a bit of that I don't say joie de vivre, but that figuring stuff out mentality, that just kind of getting at it and figuring it out. There's an interesting balance there for me still.
Yeah, I've got to say, when I invested in the Wired Agency 5 years ago, I think my understanding from where I've been, it came to use really well, because 5 years ago, I probably had that good retrospective understanding of what is required to start a business. So when I invested in the Wired Agency, I probably had a more developed understanding of what it takes to build a business. And, never underestimate the importance of having a good system and process, because that's really fundamental to building a successful agency. But yeah, I've learned so much over the last 16 years, and I have been able to apply those learnings to Wired, and hopefully that's helped us grow. We're now a team of 28. We've hired 10 people in the last 8 months, and it's going really well.
I find that I guess there's that process and sort of system is very beneficial, because there's so much. But I say, particularly in agency businesses, there's something about them that they can be more complicated than a lot of businesses, or maybe we complicate them ourselves. Selling creative services, there's a distinction in selling services versus product. So there can be complexity. So there's probably enough complexity that you can knock out a bunch of that with process and systems and still kind of stack on that, figuring stuff out for yourself, learning how to think and learning how to be adaptable as a leader. I think that's a critical skill set for agency leaders, particularly to develop that ability just to go, right, here's a problem. I'm just going to go into it. I'm okay if I fail. I'm okay if I mess it up, because I know on the back end of that, I'm going to figure it out somehow. I'm going to learn because I failed, or I'm going to learn because I win. Either way, I'm willing to step into that fear. I'm going to make sales calls. I'm going to jump on and send cold emails. I'm just going to kind of get out and try something. I'm going to hire 10 people, and maybe 5 of them are going to be amazing, 5 are going to be shit, but I kind of just get into it. And, so system and process, I think, is important and fills a bunch of stuff, but that knowing how to think and knowing how to be adaptable, as you said, is critical.
It's super important.
Is that
I'd say one thing that I would invest in the early days is leadership training. I think you can fake it to a certain point, but I think in terms of agencies being successful, people and culture, in my opinion, is really the number one priority. And how developing skills on how to manage people, it's a real skill and it requires an investment of your time. And there's some excellent leadership trainers out there. And I think one of the key things that I've taken away from leadership training is that to be a good leader, it's actually quite simple. And this is obviously my opinion, but if you invest time in really understanding who you are and how you show up as a leader and understanding your team on an individual level, I think if you can nail both of those things, then managing people becomes a little bit easier and you can become more of an effective leader. And it's about having that emotional intelligence to understand what motivates and demotivates people. And on any one team, you might have something that motivates someone that also demotivates someone else. So understanding the differences within the people in your team is probably the most critically important thing you can achieve as a leader.
Yeah, I love that you talk about emotional intelligence again, because that is a skill set that it's a skill set, right? You have to develop emotional intelligence. A lot of the time, some people are more natural leaders, right? And the more personality types and character traits that make them more able just to be more, I guess, just have emotional intelligence. Like people have higher intelligence, right? You can have a bit more of that sympathetic, empathetic outlook. For some people, you've really got to deliberately develop that side.
You do, yeah, you're right.
You're going to be
it
a
comes
leader.
naturally to some people, other people it doesn't. But I do believe that anyone can develop emotional intelligence. And I think it starts by understanding who you are, like really understanding who you are. And that requires you to leave your ego at the door, because learning about yourself means understanding everything, including the flaws, if you like to call it that. And that can be really difficult to face that sort of thing. But I think once you do that, then it's much easier to show up as a supportive leader because you understand yourself.
Yeah, that balance between self-awareness and emotional intelligence is that's leadership or particularly like modern leadership in a nutshell. Like saying that building that culture inside an agency and trying to have a company-wide and agency-wide culture that supports all these different personality types and people that like to work in different ways. How do you, if you want to get semi-tactical for a minute, because this is a massive piece that a lot of agency owners get to, where you've been the practitioner, you've got a business now I'm not on the tools. Now I'm having to manage people, and this is a whole other thing. And eventually that's what agency leadership becomes, right? It becomes about people, whether it's clients or whether it's internal people. It's about human to human relationships. It always comes back to, it becomes a relationship game and emotional intelligence and these kinds of things. Tactically, how does that look like for you? Are you doing Briggs-Meyer tests? Are you doing personality trait tests? Are you sort of getting some baseline understanding of, okay, here's a profile of this person, they're going to prefer to work like this, and then are you then saying, okay, this is how you prefer to work, so we're going to build flexible work times? How does that sort of look practically for you?
Yeah, so practically speaking, you can't, saying you need to know yourself and you need to know the individuals on your team, that's all great, but you need to have that process behind it to discover who your team is and who you really are. So I would recommend we start with personality profiling. Absolutely, I think that's really important, like personality testing. So we have used 2 different programs in the past. The one that I would prefer is called Facet 5. I don't know if you've heard of that, but Facet 5 is a personality profiling software program. And if every individual does it, it then maps out where each of you sit along the personality map. And then it's about, once you've done that, it's about applying the understandings. So in that, it talks about what motivates, what demotivates, how you come across or how you're perceived by people. And if every individual does it, then you can work out how you can adjust as a leader, how you can adjust your management style to suit the individuals on your team. And it feels like a bit of work at first, but once you invest the time up front, then you've got that really good foundation. And then you can, it sort of becomes second nature, I suppose, because once you've invested in the program and you've invested in really understanding your people, then you know when you talk to one individual, you know that you need to adjust the way that you provide feedback, for example. Like, someone who's very straight down the line and, likes things to just be black and white, you know that you don't necessarily need to cushion feedback. You can just give it to them straight up. But then you've got people who are slightly more introverted and sensitive. And for those types of people, you wouldn't give feedback straight up because it could hurt their feelings or it might demotivate them. So adjusting the way that you give the feedback is really important.
Yeah. And do you find that there's a second or secondary benefit that your staff understand themselves a bit better as well? having done these things, okay, that at least I now have some semblance of like I can relate to these things, and yes, that's a strength for me, that's a weakness. Okay, I get myself a bit better now.
Yeah, it's a really nice process to go through, and actually getting in a room and sharing your profiles with other individuals, it actually promotes a bit of vulnerability. And to me, vulnerability and trust are the two key ingredients to creating really good culture, because once you're able to really be yourself in front of your people, it breaks down any of the barriers that you potentially had before you started that process. And vulnerability is such a beautiful thing in business, because I think as business owners, we feel the pressure to act a certain way and to be a certain type of person, but it's just not necessary anymore. It might have been 20 years ago, but it's not necessary anymore. I think people respond really well to vulnerability.
Yeah. And authenticity is a word that gets bandied around and thrown around a lot, but it's there for a reason. That being your authentic self has a lot of benefit just from how you work and how you show up. And if you can be yourself, which sounds like a simple thing, as I said, in the past, maybe going back to the 80s, 90s, bigger corporate style of working, it was less easy to be yourself. You sort of had to be somebody else or position yourself to
I think it's quite reflective of leadership, actually, because when I first started out, the leadership style was so different compared to what it is today. Back then, as an employee, you had to adapt to the leader's style. You had to do your time and do what you're told. And, it was a very one-way kind of process. And so I think because of that, it was really hard for individuals to be themselves completely, because there wasn't that sort of space to allow for that. Whereas now I think it's the absolute opposite. It's about what leaders can do for their people and how leaders can better support their people to make sure they're being authentic and to make sure they're being themselves. But then I think, so if we're just going back to what sort of things you need to think about as a leader and understanding people, you've got things like Facet 5, which is really good. And then I think once you have that baseline understanding of your people and who you are, then it's about attaching that to the commercial reality of running a business. So because our business is people and the only thing we sell is our time, so we're service-based, 90% of our business plan is actually focused on people, because our belief is that if our people are inspired and engaged and motivated and loyal to the company, then everything tends to look after itself. So I think the worst thing we can do as an agency is focus on profit, because we're a people-based business. And our philosophy is if we look after our people, then our profit tends to take care of itself. And I think, this is my perspective, but the proof's in the pudding, because our business is, we're maintaining a 21, 22% margin without focusing on profit at all.
Yeah. Well, as I said, business becomes a team game and a people game. You can have an amazing commercial business, and if your team disappears, you suddenly don't have a business anymore. So it makes a lot of sense to invest in your people. Do you, in terms of investing in people, do you invest in terms of training, skills development, programs, that sort of thing? How do you build that culture? That culture piece I found has been really interesting, particularly over the last couple of years where we've been locked down, shut down, not at work, working remotely. It's a really interesting space. How have you sort of managed that?
Oh gosh, we have we have so many programs here. I could spend a whole hour talking about what we do here in terms of our people. But I think the main thing as far as creating a good culture is concerned is going back to understanding who your team is and what needs they have, I suppose. And there's no one size fits all program. It's not like, I don't believe that there is a set formula to create a good culture. I think it all depends on the type of people you hire and what their needs are. So we start at that level. We understand what the core needs are of our people. And the way that we do that is through personality profiling, obviously, but we do team happiness surveys every 6 months. We do one-on-one sessions with our team to really understand who they are and what their needs are. And then we build culture programs around that. So it could be anything from Wired World. We've got a couple of people who live overseas or who came from overseas. So Wired World allows people to go anywhere in the world and work for 2 months, and they work remotely. So that we've listened to what our team needs and we've created an option for people. We have, what else do we have? Working, like flexible working obviously is a really big thing. And I think COVID has obviously accelerated that process. So we look at, like, we've got a bit of a hybrid model at the moment, but we're really seriously considering just a fully flexible model and even a 4-day working week situation. There's obviously a lot of research needs to go in that, and we need to, obviously we represent clients, so the clients need to feel comfortable about a 4-day working week, but it is something that I think isn't going to go away, nor is flexible working. So the best thing we can do is just to face it head on.
And the funny thing tends to be when you kind of put those restrictions around things, productivity and performance actually ratchets up when you sort of tighten deadlines, say move from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week or a 7-hour work day instead of a 7, 8, 9, 10-hour work day. When you put those restrictions on, productivity actually and performance actually enhances. But having those conversations with clients and saying, hey, we're off on Fridays now, balancing that out, and it really comes down to, we hit our milestones, we're still delivering, everything's getting done, you're getting the results on the back end. We're just shaving down the inputs. We're doing 4 days instead of 5. But as long as the results are there for clients, that tends to be where they go, okay, well, the results are the same. That's fine by us.
It's spot on. As long as we are output focused, then it shouldn't be about the number of hours we do. If we can maintain the output, then you're right, it shouldn't matter. If you're hitting milestones, for example, you're building a website, it used to take you 7 days, if it now takes you 3 days, what's the difference? It's a couple extra days for you to move on to other things, or take some recovery time and that sort of thing. But it's a really interesting space. That performance space is super interesting in an agency environment, particularly where there is that generally that demand from clients of 24/7, 365 on the Slack channel. I've got a problem now, respond. Finding that balance where your team is really happy, and when the happier they are, the more autonomous they are, the better they actually tend to produce, but they're balancing that against client expectation. I think that the traditional client relationship has evolved a lot over the years too. Like when I first started out in PR working in an agency, it was all about servicing the client, putting the client first. It tended to be quite a one-way relationship, whereas now I do think they are true partnerships, and clients understand that we're people just like they are, and we require certain things as a business. So I think there's a lot more mutual respect, trust and understanding between clients. So it does make it easier to bring them along the journey and introduce them to the types of initiatives we're looking at, including flexible working.
Yes, that's super interesting. Again, that's shifted. Everyone's been so shifted over the last couple of years that all of these new ways of working have really come to the fore. So again, clients are as you said, clients have that understanding because they're going through the same stuff, right? They're working from home. They're going through this upheaval. They're like, well, can we necessarily expect our agency to work how maybe we used to expect them to work if we're not working in the same way? So that dialogue's certainly very interesting at the moment.
It is.
Awesome. So such good insights. I like speaking to people that have had sort of rich history and sort of been on this through this process, through this journey, over a couple of decades, and really seen how things have changed.
That makes me feel so old.
I'm the same. It's all right. We're all still young at heart, and we're still, we've still got plenty left in the tank. But that having that sort of heritage, and I think particularly like the last couple of decades, there has been such a big shift in how agencies operate, how the world operates, how consumers buy, client expectation, customer expectation. It's been quite exponential. It's been quite a rapid shift. So it's always interesting to sort of have that perspective.
Yeah, I think it's very humbling too, because I came from a background where I started from nothing in terms of starting the agency. I didn't have investors. I didn't have the luxury of having money to start the business. So I've probably developed a very good understanding of how to build a business from nothing, and that's very humbling.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important in business, actually, to remain humble, regardless of how big or successful you are. And then I think closely related to that is complacency, never being complacent, never thinking you've nailed it, because business is so fickle, and, how we're living at the moment is pretty unpredictable. So I think having a really good respect and appreciation for what you've done, and knowing that anything can change at any point, is a really good place to be. Because I think another thing about business is having the ability to be intuitive about whether there's problems there. And if you think you're nailing it, it tends to cloud your judgment a little bit.
Yeah, massive point. Yeah, so many amazing insights. I'm sure we could ramble on for the next hour and a half and keep going. But yeah, thank you so much. So incredible insights, a lot for people to listen back and sort of dig into a lot of the stuff that we've talked about here today. If people want to connect with you and find out more about you, where are some of the best places for them to do that?
I'd say LinkedIn. People can send me a message on LinkedIn. If they wanted to check out the Wide Agency website, it's up on the screen. Get in touch anytime.
Awesome. And as always, I'll drop those links in the show notes so you can go get connected to Michelle in whatever way you seem fit. But yeah, lots of experience, lots of really good insights, critical stuff that we sort of talked about today. I'm definitely going to go check out that Facet 5. I mean, building culture, having humility, leadership skills, emotional intelligence, a lot of really, really critical stuff that we've sort of covered here today for leaders, for agency owners to really kind of dig into a bit more and make sure that you're sort of hitting those pillars of what it is to be an agency owner. So yeah, really appreciate you bringing that stuff to the fore, and really enjoyed our chat today. Thanks for swinging by.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks to everyone tuning in at home, and we'll see you on the next one.